Rewritten Netflix-style documentary. Hollywood's golden age shimmered with glamour, romance, and stars so flawless they seemed sculpted from light. Audiences saw perfection, impossibly beautiful people living impossibly perfect lives. But behind the glow of studio lamps and polished press releases, some of Hollywood's brightest icons were performing off-screen roles far more dangerous than anything written in their contracts. Love affairs hidden in shadows, secrets traded for silence, identities reshaped by publicists with the power to rewrite reality. In an era where authenticity could end a career overnight, these legends lived double lives, portraying characters not just on film, but in their everyday existence. Tonight, we draw back the velvet curtain on 15 haunting scandals from Hollywood's most tightly controlled era. Stories of forbidden desires, staged marriages, and the brutal cost of fame when your truth was considered box office poison. This isn't gossip, it's survival. If you want the untold stories of old Hollywood's hidden lives and buried romances, subscribe now, because these truths deserve to exist without studio spin. And drop a comment with the revelation that stunned you most. Rock Hudson, the heartthrob whose truth came too late. For nearly 20 years, Rock Hudson embodied the fantasy of American masculinity. Tall, magnetic, charming, the romantic lead who made the world swoon in giant, pillow talk, and countless glossy studio romances. But the man who symbolized the ultimate leading man was living a secret that cost him everything. Rock Hudson was gay, and in the 1950s and 60s, that truth was professional suicide. His agent, the infamous Henry Wilson, engineered an entire false reality around him, including a fabricated marriage to his secretary, Phyllis Gates, meant only to quiet persistent rumors. Hudson played the role. He posed for wedding photos, smiled for the magazines, then quietly divorced and slipped back into secrecy. For decades, he maintained the illusion. Carefully staged dates with actresses, public denials crafted with surgical precision, a persona polished so flawlessly that no one dared question it. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. In 1985, Hudson revealed he was dying of AIDS. The world was shocked. The romantic titan suddenly became the face of a crisis America had tried to ignore. His frail appearance at a press conference forced millions to confront what they'd feared, denied, or dismissed. Months later, he was gone. His greatest tragedy wasn't the illness. It was that he spent his healthiest years pretending to be someone he wasn't. Montgomery Clift, the beautiful rebel who refused to disappear. Montgomery Clift changed Hollywood simply by existing. With his fragile beauty, sorrow-filled eyes, and emotional vulnerability, he shattered the era's rigid mold of masculine stoicism. His performances in A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity were revolutionary. But Clift never surrendered himself to the studio system. He lived in New York, far from Hollywood's surveillance, carving out a life built on privacy and autonomy. Though magazines linked him romantically to Elizabeth Taylor, his closest friend, who understood every corner of his hidden world, those who truly knew him were aware he loved both men and women. Debbie Reynolds once said plainly that Monty had both a boyfriend and a girlfriend at the same time. His mother confirmed he'd understood his attraction to men since childhood. Within his private circle, Clift wasn't hiding. He simply lived. In Red River, he embedded subtle queer undertones that somehow slipped past studio censors, a quiet rebellion that survives on screen to this day. He never issued a public coming out, but he also never built elaborate lies. Clift refused restrictive studio contracts, rewrote his own dialogue, and lived surrounded by books in his Manhattan apartment far from Hollywood's watchful eyes. While others staged fake marriages and choreographed romances, Clift chose authenticity, even when it cost him roles and fueled relentless rumors. He remained true to himself until his early and tragic death. Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, Bachelor Hall, and the romance hidden in plain sight. Cary Grant embodied elegance, tailored suits, effortless wit, that trademark charm. But behind the studio-approved veneer was a private life far more complicated. In 1932, Grant met fellow actor Randolph Scott on the set of Hot Saturday. From that moment, the men became inseparable. They lived together for 12 years in a beachside villa they affectionately called Bachelor Hall. Magazines featured them constantly, cooking together, sunbathing by the pool, sharing a home like a married couple. Photographs from the era show domestic intimacy so bold, it's astonishing the studio system didn't shut it down. Rumors circulated quietly, even as the studios worked overtime to brand Grant as the ideal ladies' man. In a rare 1986 interview with Barbara Walters, Grant offered a moment of striking vulnerability. "Everyone says I'm gay. Maybe I am. Honestly, I don't know." It was both confession and shield, acknowledging the whispers while refusing to be defined by them. Biographers now consider his relationship with Scott one of Hollywood's greatest hidden love stories. Grant didn't seem interested in labels, only in living honestly, however quietly he had to. Marlon Brando, the icon who told the truth before anyone else could. Marlon Brando dismantled Hollywood norms, on screen and off. From his method acting to his chaotic private life, Brando never played by the rules. Though married multiple times and father to many children, whispers of bisexuality followed him his entire career. And unlike most stars of his era, Brando didn't deny them. In 1976, he stated casually, "I've had homosexual experiences, and I'm not ashamed." It was revolutionary, not the confession itself, but the utter lack of scandal in his tone. He refused to categorize himself. He simply existed. Years later, Quincy Jones revealed that Brando had been romantically involved with comedian Richard Pryor, a claim Pryor's widow immediately confirmed, explaining Richard had openly documented his relationships with men. Other stories described complex ties with James Dean, warm affection for Montgomery Clift, and a deep, almost spiritual connection with James Baldwin. Brando's greatest rebellion wasn't his acting. It was his refusal to let the world define him. Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando, the love story that shocked Hollywood. In 2018, the world was stunned when Jennifer Lee Pryor confirmed that her late husband, legendary comedian Richard Pryor, had engaged in a romantic relationship with Marlon Brando. The revelation surfaced after Quincy Jones's explosive interview claiming Brando had slept with men, including Pryor, Marvin Gaye, and James Baldwin. While the public gasped, Jennifer Pryor calmly confirmed it. Richard, she explained, had never hidden his bisexuality from those close to him. His diaries documented everything: relationships, heartbreaks, and the wild chaos of the 1970s. "It was the 70s, she said. If you did enough cocaine, you'd be writing love letters and sending flowers the next morning." The Pryors' marriage was unconventional. Marriage, divorce, reconciliation, and a bond that lasted through fame, addiction, and illness. Richard Pryor never shied away from uncomfortable truths in his comedy. His sexuality was simply another truth, one the world wasn't ready to hear. Ramon Navarro, the silent film god, murdered for who he was. In the 1920s, Ramon Navarro wasn't just a star, he was a cinematic deity. His soulful eyes and devastating charm made him an international sensation, especially after Ben-Hur cemented his fame. But behind the adoration lived a man trapped by fear. Navarro was gay, and in early Hollywood, that truth could destroy everything. He kept his romantic life completely hidden, isolated by an industry where a single rumor could end a career. Compounded by deep Catholic guilt, he carried a lifetime of internal conflict. As silent films faded, so did his opportunities. By the 1960s, he lived quietly, far from the spotlight he once dominated. Then came the horrific night of 1968. Two young brothers broke into his home, driven by a false rumor that Navarro kept thousands of dollars inside a decorative crucifix. They beat the 69-year-old actor to death. The press erupted with homophobic sensationalism, twisting the tragedy into a moral warning rather than a murder. But those who knew him remembered a gentle, pioneering artist whose only crime was being gay in an era defined by cruelty. Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates haunted by the closet. Anthony Perkins terrified the world as Norman Bates in Psycho, but the real horror was the life he lived off camera, constantly performing a safer, straighter version of himself. Perkins was tender, brilliant, painfully shy. He fell deeply in love with men, including a secret and loving relationship with Tab Hunter. Their romance existed in hotel rooms, hidden letters, and constant fear. After Psycho, everything changed. Hollywood began tying his queerness to the darkness of his on-screen character. It became dangerous, career-threatening to let the truth slip through. Desperate to fix himself, Perkins endured conversion therapy, psychoanalysis, and medical interventions, believing the lie that homosexuality could be cured. The alternative, he was told, was career extinction. He eventually married photographer Barry Berenson. Wasn't the reason Anthony Perkins married. It wasn't that he suddenly stopped loving men. It was the exhaustion. Exhaustion from performing, from concealing, from hearing repeatedly that his truth was dangerous. His family life was real and warm, but something inside him remained forever unresolved. In 1992, Perkins died from AIDS-related complications, becoming one more name among countless queer lives erased by the epidemic. The world mourned Norman Bates, but barely knew the man who had carried that character's weight for decades. Anthony Perkins spent his entire life playing people with terrifying secrets. The cruelest irony? His own secret, simply loving who he loved, was treated with the same fear and suspicion as the characters he portrayed. Sal Mineo, the rebel killed for being different. Sal Mineo stunned audiences as Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, the sensitive kid with wounded eyes, quietly in love with James Dean's character, crushed by a world that didn't understand him. He became a teen idol overnight, earning an Oscar nomination at just 17. His beauty, talent, and vulnerability made him unforgettable. But Hollywood punishes those who don't fit its narrow definitions. By the mid-1960s, Mineo's career began to fade, not from lack of ability, but from the industry's discomfort with his openness, or more accurately, his inability to convincingly hide his bisexuality. Directors whispered he was too soft, too complicated. When he aged out of pretty boy roles, Hollywood refused to let him evolve into anything else. In 1972, Mineo publicly acknowledged his sexuality, an act of bravery that should have given him freedom. Instead, it sealed his fate. Hollywood closed its doors. He was pushed into guest TV roles in small theater productions. His ceiling lowered permanently by honesty. Then came February 12, 1976. Walking toward his West Hollywood apartment after rehearsal, Sal Mineo was stabbed in the heart by a mugger. He died in the hallway, only 37. His enormous potential gone. The media didn't mourn him, they speculated. Gay triangles, dangerous affairs, whispers that his lifestyle invited violence. But the truth was simple. It was a random robbery. Still, the damage was done. Even in death, he was treated as a scandal instead of a gifted artist stolen far too young. Hollywood first denied him belonging, then used his murder to reinforce the very bigotry that had marginalized him. Raymond Burr, Perry Mason's fictional family. Raymond Burr built a career revealing truth. As Perry Mason, he played the brilliant attorney who always unmasked the hidden. But off-screen, Burr wasn't exposing lies, he was crafting them, not out of vanity, but out of survival. Reporters constantly asked why he never married, and Burr responded with stories so tragic they seemed cinematic. A wife lost in a plane crash, another to cancer, a son who died of leukemia. The tales were detailed, emotional, and entirely fabricated. None of it was real. Not the wives, not the child. Why so many stories? Because Burr was in love with Robert Benavides, his partner of more than 30 years. They lived together, worked together, built a life of deep commitment. But in public, Benavides could only be called a close friend, never the truth. The invented tragedies weren't lies, they were armor. Shields that kept journalists from digging, that let Burr protect the person he loved from the scrutiny an unforgiving industry would have unleashed. Unlike many queer stars, Burr was never exiled. Perry Mason made him famous, wealthy, adored. But the price was intimacy, the ability to acknowledge the most important relationship of his life. Burr died in 1993, never saying publicly what everyone around him already understood. Benavides inherited everything, but he never got to call himself what he truly was: a partner, a spouse, a life companion. He became a footnote in Burr's official story, despite being the center of his real one. Spencer Tracy, the Catholic idol and his hidden torment. Spencer Tracy was Hollywood royalty, 2 Oscars, a career of effortless brilliance, and performances that felt startlingly real. He was the gold standard, the actor other actors worshipped. But behind his legendary skill lived a man torn apart by faith, identity, and expectation. As a devout Catholic, Tracy never divorced his wife, Louise Treadwell, though they lived apart for much of their lives. He remained committed to the family, especially to their deaf son, even while building an entirely separate existence away from home. Whispers about his relationships with men, especially actor John Derek, swirled for decades. Even his iconic romance with Katharine Hepburn raised questions. Many insiders suspected it was at least partly manufactured, a mutually beneficial arrangement that kept rumors at bay. A Vanity Fair article once hinted openly at Tracy's sexual fluidity. Hepburn was furious. Tracy's daughter called it absurd. But the doubts never fully disappeared, lingering alongside his crippling depression and infamous alcoholism. Tracy's drinking was catastrophic, vanishings that lasted days, violent outbursts, behavior that would have destroyed anyone else's career, but doors kept opening for him. His demons seemed too deep to be explained by stress alone, suggesting battles he could never voice. Humphrey Bogart once said, "Spence is the best because you don't see the machinery working." The same was true off-screen. Tracy's greatest performance may have been the one where he hid the version of himself Hollywood and his faith refused to let exist. James Dean, the rebel who refused to live restrained. James Dean lived fast, burned bright, and left behind a legacy that feels immortal. With his feral beauty and restless soul, he became the face of youthful rebellion in just 3 films before dying at 24. But beneath that iconic stare was a complex truth he never fully voiced publicly. Dean had relationships with women, Pierre Angeli, Ursula Andress, but rumors about his attraction to men persisted long after his death. And when asked directly, Dean offered a line both bold and devastating. "I'm not going through life with one hand tied behind me." For 1955, it was practically a revolution, honest, unapologetic, defiant of labels. William Bast, his close friend and roommate, later revealed they'd shared intimate moments. Author Jonathan Gilmour made similar claims. Director Nicholas Ray described Dean as clearly bisexual. Elizabeth Taylor spoke of Dean confiding in her about childhood abuse by a priest, a trauma that left him carrying wounds he never fully understood. Dean never offered a public declaration. He didn't need to. His life, wild, passionate, fluid, spoke for him. Gay Times later named him one of the greatest queer icons, not simply because he was a legend, but because he represented something deeper, the refusal to let fear or expectation dictate the truth of who you are. He was the picture of American masculinity, broad-shouldered, confident, a mustache that became iconic. To the public, he was untouchable. But behind that carefully curated image circulated decades of rumors, whispered stories suggesting a far more complicated life than the studio photographs ever revealed. For years, Hollywood insiders speculated about an early relationship with actor William Haynes, one of the major stars of the 1920s, and one of the few within the industry who lived more openly among friends. At a famed backstage party during Gone with the Wind, a guest allegedly teased that the leading man had once been Billy's boy. Whatever the truth, his explosive reaction that night became part of studio folklore, one of those stories people repeated only in private rooms. Like many stars of his era, he built high walls around his personal life. 5 marriages, children, and a carefully maintained public image formed the foundation of his on-screen persona. Yet the rumors never fully disappeared. Some industry accounts described close relationships with men during travels or on specific sets, stories that biographers later debated intensely. Writer David Brett would eventually frame the actor as bisexual, arguing his relationships spanned genders across his career. Journalist Ben Maddox, a confidant late in his life, was set to help guard the actor's private world from press scrutiny. When director George Cukor, longtime friend of William Haynes, was hired for Gone with the Wind, insiders whispered that their shared history fueled tension on set. Official statements cited creative differences when Cukor was replaced. Unofficial narratives suggested discomfort, perhaps rooted in past knowledge or long-circulated rumors. Whatever truth lies beneath the speculation, the star lived and died carrying pieces of himself that were never granted public acknowledgement, performing an idealized masculinity so convincingly that few ever questioned the act. He was the master Hollywood couldn't silence. George Cukor, the director behind My Fair Lady, A Star is Born, and The Philadelphia Story, shaped some of cinema's greatest performances. His mastery of dialogue and character turned actresses into legends and transformed simple scenes into emotional symphonies. But beyond the set, Cukor lived a dual life familiar to many queer artists of his generation, open among trusted friends, silent before the public. His Hollywood Hills home became a sanctuary, a private world where actors, writers, and creatives who couldn't live openly elsewhere found rare authenticity. Everyone in the industry knew about these gatherings, yet an unwritten agreement kept them protected. When he was removed from Gone with the Wind, the official narrative again focused on creative disagreements, but insiders repeated a different story, one about clashing egos, old rumors, and a star uneasy with what Cukor allegedly knew. True or not, Cukor never fought back publicly. He simply kept working, shaping films layered with subtext that bypassed censors while quietly speaking to audiences who understood. He filled screens with strong, complex women, outsiders, dreamers, fighters, mirroring the lives of people who, like him, existed between society's expectations and their own truths. His legacy is not loud rebellion, but quiet romance with Katharine Hepburn raised questions. Many insiders suspected it was at least partly manufactured, a mutually beneficial arrangement that kept rumors at bay. A Vanity Fair article once hinted openly at Tracy's sexual fluidity. Hepburn was furious. Tracy's daughter called it absurd. But the doubts never fully disappeared, lingering alongside his crippling depression and infamous alcoholism. Tracy's drinking was catastrophic, vanishings that lasted days, violent outbursts, behavior that would have destroyed anyone else's career, but doors kept opening for him. His demons seemed too deep to be explained by stress alone, suggesting battles he could never voice. Humphrey Bogart once said, "Spence is the best because you don't see the machinery working." The same was true off-screen. Tracy's greatest performance may have been the one where he hid the version of himself Hollywood and his faith refused to let exist. James Dean, the rebel who refused. He didn't just direct movies, he directed a life lived with subtle defiance, proving that artistic excellence can be its own form of resistance. And then there was Paul Lynde, the man who made America laugh even as he struggled alone behind the punchlines. With his razor-sharp wit, signature voice, and unforgettable presence on Bewitched and Hollywood Squares, he became comedy royalty. But fame is a fragile mask. In an era when queerness was tolerated only as a joke, Lynde walked a tightrope. He never formally came out, yet his coded humor and camp sensibility were unmistakable to those who recognized them. The public laughed with him, often unaware of the subtext woven into every line. Behind the cameras, he battled deep loneliness, depression, and alcoholism. Friends described a man caught between fear and visibility, too famous to disappear, too vulnerable to be fully known. He longed for genuine connection, yet the industry taught him that authenticity could cost everything. His sharp comments, often labeled as difficult, hid decades of pain, insecurity, and exhaustion. He performed constantly, on stage, on screen, in life, always the funny friend, always the safe caricature, but never allowed to show the full, complicated humanity behind the laughter. His story is a reminder that being seen is not the same as being accepted. And then there was Cole Porter, the elegant architect of some of the 20th century's most sophisticated songs. Anything Goes, Night and Day, and countless others carried his signature blend of wit, longing, and musical brilliance. Yet beneath the glamorous melodies were coded stories, whispers of forbidden love, yearning, and heartbreak that he could never voice openly. Porter lived between two worlds, adored by high society, confined by the era's rigid expectations. Many historians describe his marriage to Linda Lee Thomas as a partnership of affection and mutual support, a union that offered social protection and companionship, but not the conventional romance the public assumed. Within private circles, his relationships were understood, but in public, they remained unspoken. His parties were legendary, yet his deepest loves stayed in the shadows. He never publicly discussed his sexuality. Instead, he poured everything into his music, embedding layers of meaning for those who knew how to listen. Through melody and metaphor, he carved out a form of authenticity available to him in a world unwilling to grant more. Porter's legacy survives not just in timeless compositions, but in the way he turned personal restriction into breathtaking art. These stories, and the many like them, expose the hidden costs of fame in old Hollywood's golden age, where authenticity could end a career overnight. Beneath the glamour were rigid contracts, studio-manufactured marriages, and identities shaped not by truth, but by marketing strategy. Three patterns emerge. First, the industry knew everything. Studio executives controlled narratives with precision, crafting biographies, arranging relationships, and shaping public personas. Second, the emotional toll was devastating. Many coped with secrecy through addictions, depression, or total isolation. Third, survival required performance far beyond the screen. Those who endured became experts at living double lives, protecting personal truths with fierce discipline. These weren't just movie stars, they were individuals navigating a world designed to edit their humanity. Every hidden relationship, every altered biography, every coded performance represented a life forced into shadows. The tragedies were not accidents. They were consequences of a system prioritizing profit over people. If these buried stories of old Hollywood moved you, subscribe so their truths aren't forgotten again. Tell us which story resonated most, and remember that the freedoms artists fight for today were built on the quiet resilience of those who came before.